you guys up
Yeah, me
anymore.
too.
Dave, can you see us, David?
Yeah, it just says it can't detect my camera, so I can see everybody. You're just going to see my face. And I don't know, I'll have to look into it. I don't know why it's not.
And nobody's perfect.
Okay, well, it's a nice picture of you anyway, so we're good.
Not what I'm supposed to do.
Okay, what I'd like to do tonight is really talk more about the big picture. We're going to go over the section on honoring the game, but there's not a whole lot of slides to go through for honoring the game. This end of the workshop, I feel is, and I don't know, I've said this every time, this is a really important aspect to wrap up this workshop, because all the way through, all the weeks that we've been going through and the slides, they've been very specific. They've had very specific tools, very specific goals. We've had interactive activities, and this section on honoring the game is really where you need the audience to make it real to them that a culture change needs to happen. And the term that we've coined at PCA, development zone, which we actually have a patent on, is really what needs to be created. And I think going through the workshop in this order is kind of neat, because you've got all these coaches coming from all different backgrounds. Some totally believe in this and already have a positive culture in their team, and other ones don't. So all the way through the workshop, you've been giving them a lot of ideas. They've been having fun. They've been sharing. Now it gets to the point with honoring the game where you're introducing them to a topic that they think they already know, because everybody thinks honoring the game is the same thing as sportsmanship. And I would just like to hear from you guys real quick. Why do you think we choose the term honoring the game rather than just let's be good sports or have character building in sports? Anybody have an idea?
I think probably because it is so much more encompassing of what PCA is trying to do, as opposed to sort of a limited focus in being good sports.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I think it's more of a philosophy as opposed to, they said in the book, sportsmanship is what you should do, what you shouldn't do. So it's more of a negative as opposed to overall philosophy.
Good. I like that a lot. I always point that out a lot, that the kids are so used to hearing don't, no, no, no. Honoring the game really, as David said, talks about what you should be doing, and it's a positive change that you're making.
I agree with that.
Okay. Sorry, I have Hank still trying to join here. He's still texting me trying to get in. Okay. So when we get to this portion, we've already talked in the very beginning. If you have the slideshow open, we've already talked about slide 9, and I can pull that up real quick so that you guys can see exactly what I'm talking about. Way back at the beginning, let's see, here it is. Okay, this is the honoring the game part. Can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay, way back in the beginning, the slide that you explained to them, to the audience, about the system approach that we have at PCA. And this is really important because, here it is, slide 9 right there. Can you see that? A lot of these are terms that they've never heard before. So I always go back to this slide right before I get to honoring the game. And I talk about the term development zone because, again, it's a term that not a lot of people are familiar with. And I asked you in your questions this week to sort of talk about what that means to you. But before we get into that, I want you to just take a look at the terminology here, because it's really important that you have the terminology correct. Obviously, this is a double goal coach workshop, and we've sort of talked about that a lot. Our goal, number one goal, is to win as coaches, but the more important goal is to teach life lessons and build character. When we're talking about parents, we call them second goal parents, because we don't need the parents to focus on the winning. Leave the winning to the coaches and the players. Parents, your goal is to just help the kids absorb the life lessons. If you talk about the athletes, their job is to focus on constantly bettering themselves, their teammates, and the game. But if you take a look back at the leaders, because this is the framework for the different workshops that PCA offers. If you take a look at the leaders have a single goal. And when we talk about a single goal leader, most of the time in sports, the single goal of most leaders in any youth sports organization is what? What's their goal?
Win.
To win, exactly.
Win.
So when we talk about a single goal leader, winning is not their goal. Their goal is to shape a culture, to create and defend the development zone. So how do you think you would make this idea of a development zone real to these coaches you're talking to that have never heard that term before? How would you describe that term, development zone? Just in a sentence or two or a general idea.
I think it's a safe place for the kids to make mistakes and learn from them.
Okay, a safe place, good. What else?
Yeah, along those lines, just an opportunity where these kids can grow. There's always movement forward, an opportunity for growth. They don't become stagnant because they're not ignored.
Okay.
I would say that the development zone should be someplace not only where it's safe and athletes have a chance to develop, but also where there's a broad spectrum of things that are trying to be achieved, and not just one or two things, but just a wide variety of opportunities for the athlete, for even the parent, the coach to develop. That's what I would say.
Okay. What would be the opposite of a development zone?
I think the opposite would be an incredibly unhealthy environment. I mean, you've seen that in workplaces. I've also seen it in sports environments too, where the people become so timid, they're afraid to make mistakes, and people get put down and beat down to the point where they lose their passion.
Okay. All right. Well, if I had to say to you, if you thought most sports teams in this country today, would they be using the model of a development zone, or do you think they would have a different model in their sports culture?
Professional, definitely the opposite model.
Exactly. Professional, definitely the opposite model. We call the opposite as sort of the entertainment culture in sports. There's a completely different set of goals and set of really the foundation of a culture in the entertainment sports culture versus the youth sports culture, which we call the development zone. This is a big concept for people to understand, because a lot of the behaviors that you see at the youth level that are not acceptable in our PCA culture are because they think they're in an entertainment sports culture. So, as I don't know if you got a chance to watch the TED Talk, but, Jim Thompson says if a referee blows a call in the entertainment sports culture, that's awful. That's terrible. The fans are allowed to scream. They're allowed to go wild. There's instant replays. Everything stops because of a bad call. But in a development zone culture, what does a bad call from the official mean? What can be done with a bad call from the official?
Nothing.
Nothing. And how can it be used with the athletes?
Teaching lesson.
Exactly. It's a teaching lesson.
Yeah.
So I think this is really important that you just make the... Hi, Hank. How are you?
Hey, I finally got the link. Say,
all
sorry.
right. Welcome. So what are some other things you could use to make this real to the audience, that there is a major difference between an entertainment sports culture and a development zone culture? Just a couple ideas off the top of your head. What would be some major differences? I used the example of the bad call from the official. What's another opportunity that would come up in an entertainment or professional sports that would be treated completely different than it would be, or it should be, I should say, at the youth level?
I would say the analysis of the game, and I run into this a lot with the parents, that after a hockey game where it hasn't gone the way that everybody thought it was supposed to go, there seems to be this breakdown of what happened and more importantly, who's to blame. Whether it's the officials or whatever. And so, I often talk to my parents, my athletes, about the fact that once the game's done, once the clock's down to 0, let's just leave it out there. And let's, so I think that in the development zone, you have an opportunity to talk to kids about, start and finish point and what they can control. But in the entertainment business, that's what they thrive on. I mean, the analysis component is what makes it so such a sell to the public.
Okay, good. Does anybody else have a good example?
I would say just watching the World Cup. I mean, especially with the head injuries. and the concussions, and even that German player who actually shouldn't have been playing and actually got himself out of the game.
Yeah.
You know, if there's any chance of an athlete, you know, youth athlete injuring themselves, you don't take any chances at all. You take them out of the game and put them down.
Yep. Good. How about starters versus bench players? Any thoughts on that, on playing time? What's the difference between an entertainment sports culture and development zone?
Well, in an entertainment sports culture, the starter is going to play all the time in the most critical moments. You know, when it's the development zone culture, you're going to find ways to get guys into games, and it doesn't even have to be in the last 30 seconds when the game's already been won or already been lost. I mean, you can find ways. I mean, I was reading in the book about the Mad Dog example. We had something very similar to that when I was in high school, where we had one particular guy who was rather large, and he wasn't that athletic, but when it came to the red zone defense, you know, when they got inside the 20-yard line or even the 5-yard line, you know, we called him Mad Dog himself. He would run in, he was the nose guard, and his responsibility was to plug the ball. And it wasn't just that we were using him at, you know, the last 15 seconds of the game. We used him at critical moments when they were about to score, and he felt good about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, in a pro sports culture, an entertainment sports culture, it's their job to put in the best players at all times. But in the development zone, the coach is really doing a disservice to the kids and to the team by just keeping the starters in. And I get pushback about that a lot, especially when you're giving workshops to like high school level coaches. There's a lot of debate about playing time. So I think just getting this concept of having these coaches realize that the coaching in the development zone is where they're at right now. Once you're getting paid thousands and thousands of dollars, that's when it switches over to an entertainment industry. So this culture that we're trying to create here is really a different culture than society would accept. And as coaches, we have to have the courage to be able to stand up to that, to the pushback that we get, because the fans aren't necessarily going to agree with you. The players might not agree with you. But you have to decide as coaches that this is the type of culture, this is the way we do things here, and this is how we're going to change youth sports. When the kids walk into my field or my pool or my court, this is how things are going to be done here. And in the long run, you know, a lot of coaches will kind of roll their eyes and they'll say, oh, you know, this is not going to be easy. In the long run, what are the benefits of doing these things?
Well, I was just going to thread together two ideas there that even though the idea in developmental model, it's important to think about how the player develops. I've tried to, in soccer, get away from the idea of the focus on starters, because they hear that all the time in pro sports and entertainment sports. I talk to the players and parents about, do you make the most of your minutes? And so this past fall season on my U13 team, our two best scorers consistently came off the bench, and one of them had 4 game-winning goals coming off the bench. So I said, well, so he's not a starter, which you guys have kind of sort of made to be this kind of idealized thing, but the guy who's been an impact player for us has actually been better for him to see the game for a bit. He can't run for the whole game, but he comes in at certain parts of the game and is an impact player for us.
Yeah.
And then I use that as a developmental piece to say we're really developing the player and developing this idea of mastering the game and what's best for you. But actually, if you want to think about the kind of what we're influenced by with the entertainment culture, it's actually still helping us win.
Yes, exactly. So that's the point I was getting to too. The final result in this positive sports culture is that you will have more wins on the scoreboard. And a lot of times coaches will have pushback and say, well, if I spend all this time trying to create this positive culture, I'm missing out on really important time to teach these kids skills they need to win. And I think that's the hardest. That's when you see the slides start to tip and they start to go, oh, wait, maybe this does make sense. I see a lot of aha moments at this point in the workshop where they really start to believe it. And I always say to the coaches, too.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure, go ahead. Go ahead, Phil.
You know, living down in Florida, I think, I said living down in Florida, one of the biggest things is football. Football's so intense, and guys lose their jobs so quickly. So I can assume that one of their responses is going to be, you know what, if I don't do this, well, if I don't play my best players now, then I might not have a job later on.
Right.
I kind of feel like with that, though, like in my example, hello?
Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah. I still use the same model of, hey, I want to win. My 2 best scorers played better not being starters. So it's like you can continue to attach this idea of what you think a starter is, or being a coach, where do your players play better? So in other words, we're encouraging you to be a better coach. You want to win, where do your players play better? If developing your player, it's better for this guy to come in at this moment. At the end of the day, he's not a starter, but did he help you win the game? And for you as a coach, if what you're focused on is winning games to keep your job, which is the real concern, in the end, this mastery model is saying the more your players are buying into a longer-term mastery of what you're doing, ultimately win more games. Now, if you're in a climate where someone says you got to win 5 games and you're done, that's a hard place to be. But I still would say if you're coaching up your players, which means developing them through the game, there's the chance that you're looking at how they perform, and maybe the starting piece isn't as important as what they do with their minutes.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. And I think the problem is, too, people think there's the positive sports culture and then the winning culture, and they don't see the connection between the two. And if you talk to any coach that does both, that puts both together very, very well, they'll say it's all been positives because they've seen, as Hank said, they get more out of their players, they get the players more motivated, they're excited to be there, and there's less issues, there's less concerns, and there's less problems. So I know I just spent a lot of time on that, and during the workshop, obviously, you're not going to be spending 15 minutes on just talking about the development zone, but I just wanted you to be prepared for a lot of pushback that you get, and as I said, this is a term that a lot of coaches are not familiar with, and they equate this part with development zone or winning. They don't really see the connection between both of them. So I just wanted to make you aware of that, of how this can actually make their job easier. So the first part, the way we introduce this part of the workshop is by the Mallory moment video, and I'll pull that up just so you can, so we're all on the same page if any of you don't have that up. It's, let's see. Okay, it's right here is how we start. Okay, have all of you gotten a chance to see this video?
Yeah.
Okay. Most people I find these days in this audience are pretty familiar with it. There's usually 1 or 2 that are not. This, you've just gone from E-Tank, you've just finished talking about the magic ratio, and then this is the picture that shows up on the slide. And that's the first thing I ask. Are any of you familiar with this story? And some people in the audience will say, oh, yeah, I've heard it. And I'll say, you know, I just want to show you a video that's going to help illustrate our last principle, which we call honoring the game. And this is a true story. It happened in 2008 in Central Washington. And I just want you to take a look at the video. And afterwards, I want you to think about who is honoring the game. Or why would this be a great example of honoring the game? So, you know, here's the video. It starts playing. I'm not going to play the whole thing for you right now. But
in a small town in the middle of Washington State.
Okay. So this video plays. At the end of the video, when you get down to the end here, you'll see the words pop up. And the video stops. My suggestion to you is read the words very slowly. Because if you read them fast, you're going to have a lot of dead time. So this is a chance where you can sort of slow things down and read through. Sarah hit a home run. As she rounded first base, she tore her ACL. So I just read right through that slide so that the whole audience knows what you're talking about. When you stop here, Sarah's homer would become a single. If she were replaced by a pinch runner, her homer would become a single. There's always a little pause in time before the video goes to the next interview, which is right here with Mallory Holtman. So, you know, I finish reading that section, and then I say, okay, as a coach and as a player, what would you do in this situation? And then the video continues with Mallory Holtman and explaining what she did. So that's, I mean, it's kind of a long video, but it is really a great illustration of what we're talking about. So let me go. Okay, so that's where we're at. The next video we go to, I'm sorry, the next section goes into the roots, and I talk about, okay, here's the visual. The visual is we're talking about the roots of a tree. Now, we use a lot of acronyms in PCA, and honoring the game is one of the ones that we use, and we talk about the roots. Now, why are the roots of a tree so important? What do the roots of a tree do?
Give it nourishment and strength.
Right. All the answers you're saying are correct. And you get all of these answers. Yes, they provide nourishment, stability, they hold things in place. A tree can't live without the roots. The reason that we use roots as an acronym is not only because it fits, there's 5 different things that we honor in a game, but also because if you think about it, without the roots in a tree, your tree's going to wither away and die. So we believe that this principle of honoring the game, it's so important to have this strong and in place, and then all the other areas of your culture will fall in behind it. So we talk about 5 areas of your team, and these areas are, I call them non-negotiables. This is what will make your job easier. We call this the ultimate respect for these 5 areas. Now, in the slide, It'll just show the letter R, the letter O, the letter O, the letter T, and the letter S. Now, as a trainer, you can spend a lot of time on each of these things. And most likely, you will probably only have about 15 minutes to spend on this section. So I'm just warning you to kind of keep your pace, go through it quickly, but it is important to give the audience a chance to talk about it too. So the first slide, or the first one, is the R. And I asked the audience, okay, let's talk about the R. We're talking about respect for these 5 areas of the game. Okay, what do you think the R would stand for? Somebody, take a guess.
Rules.
Don't all jump at once.
It's rules.
It's the rules, correct. Okay, obviously, why are the rules in place in any game?
Fair. Make it fair.
Okay, keep it fair and keep it safe. Anytime in a game, can a rule be broken without anybody noticing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
In an entertainment sports culture, if a rule is broken without anybody noticing, is that a positive thing or is that a negative thing? In an entertainment professional sports culture?
Positive.
It's good. It's good.
Very
They got away with it.
positive.
Who's making out?
Yeah, they got away with it. That's awesome. You're watching on your big screen TV. You're drinking your beer. You're eating your popcorn. You're like, oh, the ref didn't see that. That's awesome. He got away with that. In a development sports culture, though, it's a little bit different. If a rule's broken and no one saw it, what lessons did you just teach your players?
You can cheat.
It's okay to cheat.
Yeah.
Right. It's okay to cheat. Thank God the ref didn't see it. Okay, think of the long-term lessons you're teaching them. So what's that player going to go out and do the next time they're out on the court or the field?
Try to get away with it again.
You're right. So think about that lesson. So what I do, just between you and me, what I do for each of these is obviously we want respect for these areas. The coaches know you want respect for these 5 areas. But show them the importance of if one of these areas is compromised, the long-term effects. You just emphasize to your player, you got away with it this time, you know what, maybe you'll get away with it again. So that's one of the things I do, rules. Okay, let's go to the next one, the O. The first O, what does that stand for? Respect for what?
Opponents.
Opponents. Now let's think about opponents here. How many of you have ever played in a game, before the game started, you knew that your opponent was much more skilled than you were, or their record was higher than you, or they were just a better team than you? Anybody ever play against a team like that?
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Halfway through the game, did you play up to their level, or did you play down to their level? More often, where do your skills go when you play against a higher skilled team?
They come up.
They come up.
They go up.
Absolutely. So here's an opportunity for you as a coach. You've got opponents. We always say in PCA, you can't demonize your opponents. Your opponents are not the enemy. The word competition is actually rooted in the Latin word, which means to strive with. So if we're striving with an opponent, the idea is to push that opponent to get better every time. Because, unfortunately, that rule of getting better with your opponents also works the opposite. How many of you have ever gone into a game thinking, I'm going to crush them, we're going to do so well, and you look out there and you're like, who is this team? You've got the Bad News Bears all of a sudden. So it works the other way too.
Right.
Use the opportunity, if you have a player or an entire team matched up against a more worthy opponent, think of it as a gift. Because now you have an opportunity to elevate the skills that your team is playing against. They're going to have to play harder to hang with this more skilled team. Rather than bringing their attitude down, here's a way to make it positive. So anybody else have a quick example for how to explain opponents as an honoring the game idea?
I don't know if I'm coming through, but I often have been. Hello?
I hear you. We're good. We can hear you.
Bad connection. Someone else go.
Anybody else?
Well, from a professional standpoint, I was watching 30 for 30 on ESPN, and I was watching Michael Jordan was telling us this about the Bad Boys, telling how he faced the Detroit Pistons, and over the long term, it made him a greater player because he had to go through such a difficult time. And these guys, the guys that banged him and bruised him around, but without going through them, he wouldn't have been as great as he was.
Good point. Great. And that's a quick, easy example. Bring those quick examples in. Anybody else?
A couple of opportunities I've had to, especially when I've coached internationally, some of the teams actually get together before the game. You know what I mean? The opponents actually meet each other. The teams meet each other. They shake hands. They exchange pens. They do things that and I always want the kids to know when I'm coaching that, hey, you could be on that team just as easily as you could be on this team. Mm-hmm. And so when you're out there, play hard, play competitive, but also realize that we want everybody to go home safe and those kinds of things. And I think when you humanize the opponent and not demonize, as you put it, Kelly, I think it goes a long ways for that fair play. And when I use fair play, I often talk about the fact that it doesn't mean I play light or easy, but we don't break the rules. We don't take the cheap shots. We don't take the easy way. And so, those are the kind of conversations I like to have with my teams before we go.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of those things you were talking about, getting together before the game, going over and shaking hands before the game starts, anything you can do to show respect. I was coaching my daughter's lacrosse team, and we played. It was a travel team. We played against another team. We got there, and the coaches met up with us, and they said, "Hi, welcome to our field. Bathrooms over there, locker rooms over there, whatever you need. And here's a set of water bottles. Here's a case of water bottles we have for you, and here's some sliced oranges." So they made snacks for my team showing up, and I was so impressed by that. I thought, that's really cool. How hard would it be to get a parent to make a couple extra snacks or to buy an extra case of water? It was just that little gesture made it seem, that much better. So, okay, there's opponents. Let's look at officials. All right, honoring the officials, not always the easiest thing to do. I think it was Ken said at the one call, which I never thought about it before. He was an official for many, many years. And Ken said, one of the things that's toughest as the official is 50% of the crowd is always going to think you're wrong. And I thought that was great. I never thought of it that way. But one of the problems we're having in sports is we're losing officials at an alarming rate. And if you ask those officials that are quitting their jobs, the number one reason, it's not because of the pay, because most of them per hour are actually getting paid pretty well. It's because of the disrespect. So who's the number one example that the kids are going to learn from in respecting the officials?
Coaches.
Coaches. Absolutely. Coaches. And I saw in a lot of your written examples this week in the discussion, you talked a lot about being the culture you want to see. Be the coach that you want to be. Anytime a player will see you as a coach disrespecting an official, that's going to be okay for them too. So keep that in mind. I also always tell this story too. I had an uncle that was a policeman in Philadelphia, and he would always say, I wanted to buy a car when I was a freshman in college, and he said, don't buy a red one. And I said, why not? And he said, red cars get 50% more speeding tickets than any other color. And I was like, wow, I didn't know that. So I was talking to another friend that was an official, and she said, guess which color face coaches get more calls against them than any other color? Yeah. And she said red. So most coaches will agree that the more loud mouth the coaches are and more disrespectful, they're going to get more calls called against them.
Sure.
So keep that in mind as well. Anybody else have a quick official story honoring the game? Anything you want to share? Anybody ever have trouble on their team with players disrespecting officials?
Yes.
Okay, why do you think players would disrespect officials, other than maybe they've seen your example as a coach? Why would a player disrespect an official on a call?
Well, according to my player, she's a ref too, so she's able to do that.
Okay. So she's reffed games, so she's allowed to be disrespectful.
Right. That's when she got the red card.
Exactly. One of the things, one of the tools that I always say is a great tool to use. Go ahead, Phil.
I think for the most part they just. I think for the most part they get so caught up in their emotions they lose their cool. And they forget who they're talking to sometimes.
Yes. So have a keep your cool plan ahead of time. If you know it's going to be a heated game, have some things in mind. The other thing too, make the kids aware. If you have a kid that's being disrespectful to an official, just make it a nice, cool, casual conversation. Walk over and say, hey, how you doing tonight in this game? And he or she might say, well, I'm doing okay. Have you made any mistakes yet? And the player might say, yeah, I kind of blew that last shot. I wasn't guarding my defender the way I should have. And a coach's response could be something like, that official makes mistakes too sometimes, and that's okay because they're human, and we've got to push those aside too and move on. So
Kelly, there's an interesting side to that. When you're talking about the entertainment business, if you watch how players react to officials' calls during games, I think kids imitate what they see. Add to that a lot of us are coaching that 12 to 15 to 16-year-old range where you've got all sorts of changes going on. I mean, when you combine those kinds of things, it oftentimes can be really difficult to get them to respect the officials because they see the officials as being, authority. And I think at that age level, the authority component, it riles against them a little bit. And so, I'm always really careful, or try to be careful, to not only humanize the opponents, but also humanize the officials.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I always say, too, every official will always walk over and talk to your team if you ask them to. So I did that a lot with my youth teams, my younger teams. Before the games, we had a lot of high school officials, and I would say, would you mind going over to my team and just introducing yourself and just give them a couple pointers, some of the things you're going to be looking for. And every official is so happy to do that, and the kids really listen, and it just makes them, as you said, Greg, a little bit more human. All right, next one, teammates. The rule of thumb with the teammates is that ultimate respect for the teammates on and off the field, which is very difficult for some teams to do. You can be best friends with the person, or they might be your arch enemy, but on the field you're a team and you're a unit. And the behaviors that you show, if you're showing any type of behavior or backstabbing or things like that, that's not how we do it here. That is a cultural thing. I've had a lot of coaches say I've got a lot of bickering or arguing or trash talking between my team. And that right there, that's a culture that coach is allowing to happen. So as a coach, how do you stop that from happening? What are some proactive things you can do to build that team unity so that backstabbing and trash talking isn't part of the culture? What are some things you've done on your teams?
Well,
I think one of the things that I've done before is when people start trash talking to the opponent, I take them out. There's no room for it. I don't have time for it because a lot of times I'll rile up the opponent to play better. So I take them out because now you're hurting our team at this particular moment in time.
All right, thanks, Phil. Greg, or Dave, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Basically, what the positive things, whatever you reward the kids do, and the opposite happens. So when that happens, the kids they're out of the game, and they learn very quickly that you just don't take that, and it doesn't happen really ever again after that.
Good.
And even if you lose, that's about taking the high road, looking at the long-term effects. So,
good.
Hard, but.
All right. Anybody else?
So I would say that what I try and do is I try to have my teams understand that as a group they're stronger together than they are individually, and so to get them to understand that everybody has different ways of reacting, everybody has different ways of receiving information, and really for them to understand that if they help each other out, they will get further than if they fight an infight. And I think the hardest part with a team is understanding that it's made up of individuals, and it sounds simple enough, but it's important that and you don't know what a kid's life is at home all the time. You don't know what their school life is like. They bring so much baggage. And so I think, but when you talk to them about being on a team and that being a safe area, I think you can get a long ways with kids if you just communicate with them.
Good. Okay.
I actually have I have used, for that matter, a complaint captain. So it doesn't have to be the captain of the team. Usually that's who I start with at the beginning of the season, for that matter. And if there are any complaints or any type of bickering between two players, then they both get to use the captain as a soundboard to a certain extent, to where they'll resolve it, either one captain or two captains, depending on how many I have on the team. And if that does not work, then I get myself involved in it.
Okay. That's great. And then all the
By
complaints
the
aren't
time they're
coming
done. Right. So I actually do the same thing in my classroom. So when I teach, it's the same concept. I have a complaint kit. So if there's a kid that has any complaining to do, just go straight to them, and then they'll kind of refer to me if there's it can be saved or solved for that matter.
So do you keep the same kid, or do you rotate that person?
I rotate. I've done it both ways. I've done it with just the captains, but I've also done it with different kids. And obviously, I look for leadership role, captains or not. Obviously, I've never used a freshman as a complaint captain per se, but I have used I usually go with upperclassmen, either 12th graders or 10th graders who have gone or something with.
All right, I like that idea. I like that idea a lot. All right, so then the last one is respect for yourself. And this is something, again, this is part of the culture. Kids are hardest on themselves. And I find that kids, over the course of generations have changed a lot about the way they view sports. I remember when I played field hockey and basketball and lacrosse in high school and even into college, there was a lot of fun on the bus. We were laughing and joking and singing, and this is on the way to the game. We were just, so excited. And when I started coaching high school, I realized that on the way to a game, the kids all had their headphones on and they were completely silent. Have any of you noticed that at all?
Yeah.
Sort of a difference, yeah.
Yeah.
And my issue with that, I was thinking to myself, the first couple times I did it, I thought, as the coach, I told them no headphones at all on the way to a game. I want them to be interacting and having fun and talking about things. And a lot of the players at first were like, well, that's ridiculous. I can't do that. That's part of who I am. That's part of the game. But it really made a difference to the players because they got to be a little bit more lighthearted on the way to the game. They weren't so serious. And I think a lot of that stems from the kids are so worried about, as you said, fear of mistakes, but also embarrassing themselves, or what are their parents going to think of them, or what are their coaches going to think if they don't do well, that they get so focused and they lose some respect for themselves before the game even starts. So that's something, when it comes to respecting themselves, it's just something that we say on this team. Again, you guys have shared examples of this. We are a team, we are a unit, we're all one, and everyone has a special role to play. Do you guys have anything to add to that? You can see I sort of go through this pretty quickly, but do you have anything to add to that?
No.
I think technology has I agree with you 100%, Kelly. I think technology has done a lot of good things. I think one thing it has definitely done, though, is isolate kids more than ever. And so, like, for instance, our locker rooms this year, we didn't allow technology in. Other than one player was allowed to bring music for the entire team, and they play a boombox, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But they had a warm up and ritual, and they had travel rituals and just a lot of things that we did. But at no time were they allowed to put the earbuds in. And they weren't allowed to get, nobody was allowed to text in the locker rooms. And what it forced them to actually get to know each other, almost like a family. And for good and for bad, and so I think if you talk to the players, we were successful in the fact that they still communicate with each other now. You know what I mean? Even after the season's over, they're still friends, and I think that helps a lot with the self component.
Sure, absolutely, great example. And a lot of times too, you are going to get pushback from players that think, oh man, you're so old, you don't know what this is like. I need to have my headphones in. I need to focus on what I'm doing. But I've had kids come back to me later and say, Coach, thanks for doing that, because I got a lot out of the pregame routines without keeping myself isolated. Just an example of something I do. It may or may not work for your team. So those are the roots. And the next slide says the importance of culture creation. And this is the slide that I leave up for a while, and I let them just look at it. The culture of the team is in your hands, and I tell the coaches, whether this is your first year of coaching or your 10th year of coaching, you have the power to change the culture of your team. And no one else has that power or that influence that you have. You have a captive audience during that season, and most of the time, players have said they listen more to their coaches than they do to their parents. So think about that power that you have as a coach and that power to change the culture in your world. We've got a lot of kids out there that are playing sports that have a pretty rough life at home, or they've come from a tough school or a tough area, and their time on your field, whether you live in inner city New York or you live in the fields of Oklahoma, that's a chance for you to have a culture on that team that's going to really send a trajectory for the rest of these kids' lives and send them on the right path. So that's it's a power that you have, and we just ask that you think about the big picture of what you're doing. And that's sort of where I, pause for a second, let everybody just kind of digest that for a minute. And I asked them in the very beginning, if you guys were on the very beginning call, I asked all the coaches why they wanted to be the most influential coach. We talked about at the very beginning, the first slides, who was the most influential coach in your life. And I had all the coaches write down one sentence that a player would say about them. So at this moment where it says the culture, the way we do things here, I asked every coach to look back at the front page of the book where they wrote down sort of their little philosophy or how they want to be remembered as a coach. And I asked them to look back at that often. And are you coaching to create that culture? Are you coaching to be that coach that you said you want to be? And, it's just, again, just pulling it all full circle. Everything that we've talked about a lot of information here. Is it all able to be wrapped up? Now, I don't want to hold you guys over the time. I know we got started late. However, the next slide, slide number 29, talks about the toolkit. And I know all of you guys read a lot of the tools. We talk about self-control routine, which, I think is pretty obvious. I have everyone in the audience open up to page 46 because there's a few lists right here of awesome tools to honor the game. And hopefully there's enough time. I always bring up two. This is my own personal opinion. One of the things I always point out is parents, because parent issues are #1 problem that a lot of coaches say. And honoring the game is also the parents' role. So I take a few extra minutes to make sure every single time I do this workshop, I bring up, for about 2 or 3 minutes, I talk about issues with parents. And I say, okay, how many of you out there that are coaching have never had an issue with parents? And I never, ever, ever get a hand. I mean, always. All right, so a friend of mine once said to me that the #1 coveted coaching position is the Little League orphans, which I just thought was fantastic. It's probably true. Kids come along with parents, and we have to learn how to deal with the parents as well. Page 49 and 50 has 5 different ways to deal with parents in a respectful way and a proactive way. The #1 thing I always do, 2 things I guarantee on every team I ever coach. #1, I have a parent meeting to set the expectations before the season starts. And #2, I appoint a culture keeper. And again, because of time, I'm not going to go into too much detail. But these are 2 things that are crucial on every team that I coach. John Fouts, who's also in this course, who was not able to join us tonight on this call, he called me on Thursday, and he talked to me for about a half an hour about his football team that he coaches. And he has 4 to 6 culture keepers at every single game, for the whole season. 4 people to 6 people that he volunteers. And just to keep it simple, he trains those people to say to someone in the crowd or in the stands, these people are the coaches in the stands. So if you're doing something inappropriate, if you lose your cool as a parent in the stands, one of my culture keepers might come over and tap you on the shoulder and say, that's not the way we do things here, or that's not allowed on this team. He makes it crystal clear to the parents, that's your warning if you get tapped on the shoulder by a culture keeper. Second thing is, I call the athletic director to have you removed from the field. And he just said he's been doing this for years, and it works out very, very well. So whether you're coaching, he's at the high school level, he's got a lot of rough kids that are coming in, he's got a lot of language problems. Anytime anybody, drops an F-bomb in the stands, the culture keeper comes over right away and ends that. So I just wanted to make you aware that's something I always bring up. Parent meeting on the website. We have an agenda. If you don't do a parent meeting right now, you can look at our website, and there's a section called Tools for Coaches. And we actually have a play-by-play agenda of things that need to be said at the parent meeting. So for me, guys, those are 2 areas I never, ever skip. But if you have some that you use with your team that work even better, I always say definitely mention at least 2. Self-control routine is a slide up there, so you can mention that one. But if you have one that you use on your team that you just believe, truly in, that's what's going to connect with the audience better because your passion's going to show through. So, by all means, use it. And then the last part I just want to bring up to get into more of the toolkit at the end of the workshop, the last 15 minutes of the workshop when you have a chance to go through the scenarios again, go back to slide 32 with that scenario menu, and there's a great section on honoring the game. Become very familiar with these, because when you do your phone call to the partner 3 days ahead of time, you're going to ask them, why did you choose to become a partner with PCA? What are some of the issues that come up? And most of the time they deal with honoring the game. So here's your scenario menu right here for honoring the game. Parent conduct, official makes a bad call, there could be a sideline confrontation. This is a great one, parents as an asset. How to use parents in a positive way for your team. Misapplication of the rules, parents are coaching from the sidelines. And again, this is one too, a time crunch. We're all volunteer coaches, and some of us don't have time to put together a great detailed practice plan. So that's a great scenario there too. The 3 day ahead of time phone call is a great chance for you to narrow down those scenarios. And so when it comes to that part of the workshop for honoring the game, boom, you know what? I know parents have been an issue. I know there have been a lot of problems with kids disrespecting officials. Let's get together and talk about this. And you can put up the scenario. They can get together with a group, share their ideas, jot down some notes on how they would handle it. It's a great opportunity to really nip the problems in the bud that these teams are having. So I know that was like mock speed because we got to join late. But the last part of the workshop is just to review the principles, Elm Tree of Mastery, filling the emotional tank, honoring the game. Those are the principles that go through every workshop that we do. And if you go down a little bit further, it's going to end, the workshop ends with the Herm Edwards video. And we can go through this again a little bit more next week too. But the last slide talks about how do you want to be remembered. The Herm Edwards slide starts with, when the book of your life was written, will it say you made a difference? And this is like that real powerful moment at the end of the workshop where the coaches think about how do you want to be remembered, and what are 2 or 3 things that you learned in this workshop today that you can take home and start. What really stood out at you as, wow, that is a great idea. I've never thought of doing it that way. That's really going to help me. And that's just to solidify everything that they learned. So that is pretty much the workshop in a nutshell all the way through. If you guys can give me 2 more minutes, I'm just going to explain what's going to be going on next week and the week after, which would be starting tomorrow the 15th, and it's going to go all the way through to the 25th of July. What I would like to have you do is set up a time to present. So we're pretty much done all of the content. If you've done your homework all the way through, you should feel pretty comfortable about the information. And if you've gone through the slideshow, gone through the scenarios, checked out the website, watched the videos in all your spare time, you should be all set and ready to go. So what I leave you the opportunity in the next 2 weeks is to log on either during the appointed times at 12 o'clock Thursday and 8 o'clock Monday night, or you can set up a different time. And myself and someone else on the trainer team, and hopefully other people in the course, will be able to watch you present a portion of the workshop. So if you want to pick your favorite principle, or if you'd like to do the opening or the closing or the scenarios, we would watch you present about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes of the workshop, and then we get a chance to give you some feedback. So what I would like each of you to do is, number 1, think about what time would work for you, and if the Thursday night or the Thursday afternoon or the Monday night do not work, I have some flexibility. So I can say, if you say like, well, Wednesday at 5 o'clock works better for me, let me know, and I'll put that time out there, and I'll say, okay, Wednesday 5 o'clock works for David. Can anybody else fit into that time slot? Because I like to have at least 2 people on each hangout, and they don't have to be recorded. It's just for you to get a chance to practice presenting and putting your stories in, your ideas, your interaction, and making it real. So I'm going to put an announcement starting tomorrow is going to be saying, I would like you to respond to me as to what time you would like to present and what portion of the workshop you'd like to present, so that I can sort of organize it into a schedule. Does that make sense?
Yep. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anybody have questions about that?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay, and then, as I said, myself, Eric Eisendrath, and Ruben Nieves are also going to be on, hopefully, for each of those, so you're going to get feedback from them as well. If we feel that you've done, a great job with that portion of the workshop, then what we do is we set up a live audience for you to present in your hometown where you are, usually at the executive office or wherever you are. 5 or 6 people will be there, and you would actually be presenting either for more practice if we feel you need more practice, or for certification. So the last course we had 8 people that went through the course, and we ended up certifying 6 out of 8 just from their mock presentation, and then they did a live presentation. So that was pretty exciting to see 6 people, right off the bat are certified, and actually the first one is doing her first live workshop tomorrow. So that's exciting too. So sorry I'm rambling. Do you guys have any last minute questions? If any of you have to go, thank you. But if anybody wants to stay on, if you have any questions, just let me know.
Okay. Hey, thanks, guys. Have a great night.
All right. Thanks, Greg.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Okay.
Kelly, I have one
Good night.
question.
Yes.
So give me your philosophy on playing time, because, I know that, at the rec level, it was stated that you have a certain amount of playing time and you adhere to that. And I never had a problem with that. When you get to the high school level, we're still, the courses we take, we're taught that we're supposed to play as many people as possible. But, obviously the school I'm with, it's stated that, not everybody will get in the game. So, I know what should be done, and I know what I try, but, league games, I go for a win. I mean,
yeah.
But what's the PCA philosophy on that? I mean, because like you mentioned, the right thing would be, especially at at a JV or fresh off level, that is definitely development level, and
yes.
when you shouldn't be even part of it, which is impossible. So I just want to know what your take on. Now, obviously, like I said, if you're presenting to a rec, that's pretty easy because most rec has that in the rules. But when you get into high school, it's different. So.
Well, it is, and I agree with you. And the PCA philosophy is simple. Good coaches get players into games. And if you stick with kind of that philosophy, that blanket philosophy, the best coaches get as many players as they can into games. As you said, under the age of 14, PCA sort of recommends equal playing time under the age of 14 for everyone, because that is an age where the kids are still developing physically. They might not have hit puberty yet, and if you don't allow certain players to get equal playing time, you're missing out on an opportunity to develop a player that might grow 4 inches and gain 30 pounds over the summer and be a starting player next year. Now, when you get to the high school level, obviously we understand that playing time is not going to be equal for everyone. But the one thing that PCA does talk about very strongly, as you can probably imagine, is why are the players that are getting the most playing time, why are they getting the most playing time? Is it because, now there's players out there that have an amazing amount of skill, but they might be disrespectful, they might not be working hard. So as a coach, what is your philosophy on getting players in games? Should it be just blanket statement, the most skilled players are the ones that play? Or should it be the ones that work hardest, come to games, help other players, are respectful of officials, fill each other's emotional tanks? Those are the players that should be getting into games.
Right.
So, again, it is a culture that you create on your team. We understand if it's a league game, district playoffs, something like that, obviously you're going to want your best players in there. But as a coach, what are the best players? Is it just on shooting percentages and scoring percentages? Well, then you're more of a win-at-all-cost coach. Or is it the players that really encompass the triple impact competitor that we're talking about? Are they constantly trying to make themselves better, the game better, and their players better? Sure. Okay. So, it is a fine line, and I just think, as I said, every time I'm asked that question, I just say the line that Jim Thompson puts in the Elevating Your Game book, good coaches get players into games. The other part, this is just from a personal level, I played on a field hockey team in high school, and we were state champions. And we graduated 11 seniors my senior year. Now, we won the state championship, but we had 11 seniors graduate. So the coach was on cloud 9. We pretty much played, I was rarely subbed. She started the same 11. They played the whole game through, maybe 1 or 2, in and out. The next 4 years, she called them rebuilding years.
Right.
Which is a shame to have a team coming off a state championship, and then they need 4 more years to rebuild.
Right.
So if, as a high school coach, she worked a little bit harder to get some of those second string and third string players into games more, then it wouldn't have taken 4 years to rebuild the team.
Sure.
So that's something to think about as well. And also, you know, Carol Dweck she wrote the book Mindset. She's done a lot of research on these elite players. She did a whole interview and study of the elite players in Scotland, and she found that most of the elite players in Scotland were not number 1 on their team, and they were not starters. They were number 4 or number 5 on their team.
Right.
And the reason that they worked so hard was because they knew if they worked hard, their coaches got them into games. If they were number 4 and number 5 on their team, and after a while they realized, I'm working my butt off at practice, but I'm never getting a chance to play, you're going to lose that motivation, and you're going to lose those players. So it is important at the crucial moments, even at the higher level games, that you get, if you're keeping that player on your team for a reason, that player should earn playing time. If they're not working hard enough, then that's a different issue, and that's something you can address with them. But if you're keeping them on your roster, there's no reason they shouldn't be able to get into a game. As Hank said, you know, for one reason or another, maybe they have a mad dog skill, maybe they have something that can, you know, shake up the team a little bit, but they should be able to get into games.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us.
All right. Yeah, see if I can get this camera fixed.
Okay. All right. Good night.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.